Good morning, everybody. This section is about the telecoil, and all the talk that we are doing this morning about hearing loops. Can you hear me? I can take my shoes off, and I'd be a little bit shorter. You're going to have a problem too. Everything that we're talking about with the hearing loops boils down to, do you have a good telecoil in your hearing aid? So this morning we're going to have several experts talk about the telecoil. Frankly, we could have a whole morning discussion, and we're going to cram this in about 50 minutes. And we're also going to try and allow a little bit of time afterwards for Q&A. And this is Linda Kozma-Spytek, and she will give a very brief introduction and get going. Thank you.
Thanks, Juliëtte. Can everyone hear me? I am Linda Kozma-Spytek. I'm a research audiologist in the Technology Access Program at Gallaudet University. I also am an investigator in the Rehabilitation Engineering Research Center on telecommunications access and on hearing enhancement. I've been asked to give a brief overview on telecoils and cover a variety of topics that would be of interest related to how telecoils function, what we use them for, and some things that we need to think about in terms of telecoil coupling, both from the standpoint of the telecoil itself and those things that we couple to with a telecoil. Well, a telecoil is really a very simple analog device. It's a coil of wire around a magnetic metal core that is sensitive to magnetic fields. This is a picture of some telecoils, both as components outside of the hearing device, and then you can see the telecoil in the hearing device. It's in the red circle. These devices are sensitive to magnetic fields, and so they pick up those magnetic fields, and that gets translated into an electrical signal that's delivered to the hearing aid processing. The sensitivity of these devices is determined by their size, their geometry, so the larger the telecoil, the more sensitive it typically is, and also the programming gain or amplification that's applied by your hearing device. There are such things as amplified telecoils. There's one in the upper right-hand picture, and this has not only a coil but also a preamplifier attached to it. The preamplifier increases the sensitivity of the telecoil, and these particular amplified telecoils should also have radio frequency interference protection for you, for use with cell phones, that sort of thing. If we look at the US alone and some information we have from dispensers as well as products, we learned that approximately 60% currently of hearing aid fittings in the US do include a telecoil, and currently all cochlear implants have telecoils as well, the current generation. Used in hearing devices to connect to things like phones. This has been the most common, well-known way to connect to other devices. And when we do this with a telecoil, we're doing it directly. We don't have any other ancillary devices that we need. We just have to turn on the telecoil and we can connect to telephones. Landline phones have 100% hearing aid compatibility requirement. Wireless phones, some of them also have hearing aid compatibility requirements, but that is not a 100% requirement. We use telecoils also to connect to other types of hearing assistive technology. Just like the telephone where we're connecting directly, when you have an induction loop system, you are connecting directly, so your hearing assistive technology is the telecoil itself, no other accessories required. But if we're connecting to something like an FM or infrared system, we're going to do that via a neck loop, a silhouette, or a headset. The same is true if we're connecting to other kinds of audio devices. You can use neck loops, silhouettes, and headsets with telephones, music players, that type of thing. Now, in terms of programming, your telecoil in your device. Current hearing aids typically have a fully programmable memory dedicated for telecoil use, and with that you have amplification characteristics that can be independently adjusted by the audiologist for your hearing needs. And that can include having input not only from the telecoil, but you can have input from the telecoil and the microphone in combination. It has to do with what you need. There are also amplification characteristics that can simply be set by a preset manufacturer's default telecoil program. It depends on if your audiologist is going to go further from that default program and fine-tune your hearing loss needs. When you engage the telecoil, you typically do this through a manual control, so you actually have to do something to change into the telecoil program, either through a switch, a button, a remote control. There are also automatic telecoils. Those are used with telephones where there's a signal that is produced that engages the telecoil. When that signal is removed away from the hearing aid by taking the handset away, the telecoil is disengaged. Well, why do you want to use telecoil coupling? There are several advantages to using telecoil coupling. One is that because you're picking up magnetic signals, you're not, if you're only in telecoil coupling, picking up the acoustic background noise, and this is true in all communication settings. However, even if you're not picking up the acoustic background noise, there is the potential for magnetic noise to be picked up as well. Because you're not coupling acoustically to your environment, it also reduces any kind of poor room acoustic issues like reverberation. And it also reduces the effects of distance. So if you're listening over your telecoil now, it's very much like your ear was very close to my mouth. This, however, it depends on the location of the microphone that is picking up my voice or anyone's voice. And another reason that you might want to do telecoil coupling is that it eliminates acoustic feedback. This is typically a problem with telephone coupling, but it can also occur for headsets as well. This is just a little diagram to help explain those advantages a little more. I did a little diagram here of someone speaking. We have our hearing aid wearer sitting in the front row with his hearing aid on. But the speech that's reaching him, if he's using his microphone, is going to be at a reduced level compared to what it is at the speaker's voice. And there may be other people in the room speaking. That's going to create that acoustic noise. And from those noise sources, we can get reflected sound that enters his hearing aid microphone as well, and that can be problematic. Now, if we're lucky enough to have an induction loop system in the room, and the person turns his hearing aid onto telecoil and is listening through telecoil coupling alone, then he's not going to hear that reflected noise, nor the noise from the other speakers, as long as it's not too close to the microphone, and the speech level is going to be louder. One of the things that's important to understand about use of telecoil is that orientation of the telecoil is an important factor to consider. When we're considering how to orient the telecoil for best coupling, we need to understand how the magnetic field lines interact with the telecoil itself. And for best coupling, we need the magnetic field to cut across all turns in the wire of the telecoil by aligning to the axis of the core of the telecoil. So here's a hearing aid with a vertical telecoil. Maximum coupling is when the field lines are vertical, and as that magnetic field changes its position and goes to a perpendicular orientation, we can actually get a situation where we have much reduced coupling or even no coupling at all. Same is true for a horizontally oriented telecoil in a hearing device. Maximum coupling is from a horizontal magnetic field, while if we were to have a perpendicular field, we could have no coupling at all. Here's a magnetic field in a telephone. You can see the magnetic field orientations hopefully coming out of the speaker. That's a little diagram for you to get a better idea of what those magnetic field lines look like that we can't actually see. So we have a couple of different orientations that hearing aid users can take advantage of in terms of the field lines when they're coupling their telecoil to a telephone. So in this case, horizontal telecoils can couple best with the horizontal magnetic field lines that are coming directly out of the telephone handset. But that's not the only magnetic field line that we can take advantage of for telecoil use. There are also radial fields. In this case, it's a vertical field. And you can see how the vertical telecoil can now couple best with those radial, also vertical magnetic field lines of the telephone. This particular field, the radial fields are weaker generally than that horizontal field, but we're still able to couple to telephones with telecoils having that vertical orientation. This is important because if you want to take advantage of a room loop, here's a room with a loop around it. The primary orientation of those field lines is vertical. So you can see that the vertical telecoil couples best with the vertical magnetic field lines of a room loop, and you can also couple well with a telephone with your telecoil vertically oriented. Now, a telecoil is going to encounter a variety of magnetic field strengths, and in fact, there are requirements for magnetic field strengths for both loops and for telephones. All of these requirements are slightly different, but this is to give you an idea of the type of field strengths that you might encounter from the signal that you're interested, the speech either through the room loop or over the telephone. And generally, we equate the magnetic field strengths that are measured in dB, but amps per meter, to the acoustic signal in dB SPL. And we do that through a hearing aid standard. The other thing we need to consider is the frequency response, and I talk about this as the net response because we not only need to consider the frequency response of the telecoil itself, but what we're coupling to. So we're coupling typically, at least in this example, to telephones, to inductive loop systems. The frequency response of that magnetic source gets added to the frequency response of the hearing aid telecoil, the receiver, producing a net response that then gets fed to the hearing aid signal processing for further modification based on your hearing needs. Now, what I've done is just produced a couple of actual diagrams of the frequency response. I'm getting a signal that I'm running out of time, so I'd like to talk more about this, and maybe we can do so in the question and answer period. But I think the important message I'd like to bring home is that when we're talking about telecoil coupling capability, we need to really think both about the source magnetic requirements as well as the receiver or the telecoil requirements, and that this is a system that we're talking about, and we have to consider both of these things. And in addition to that, from an audiological standpoint, we need to have a way to verify system verification goals. And what we'd like is to be able to objectively quantify the real ear performance of the hearing aid when it's in telecoil mode and coupled to whatever device is providing that inductive source in relation to the prescriptive target that has been defined based on the hearing needs of the individual. And in order to do that, what we need is a level controllable standard inductive signal source for the types of sources that the telecoil will encounter in real-world use. Thank you.
Hi, My name is Douglas Beck. I'm an audiologist. I want to thank Dana, I know she was here somewhere, and Juliëtte for inviting me. And Linda's talk was so important, but we're so time-jammed, and I want to urge you, even though Linda didn't say this, if you Google her and you just put in T-Coil in the search box with her name, you'll get a bunch of articles that she has authored or co-authored that'll go into more detail, and I think it's very important because we just, frankly, don't have the time. So, speaking of not having time, I'll start my presentation. Everybody in the room is an individual. One of the points Linda made that is so important is, you see, you can have your hearing aids and they can be totally perfect, and he can have his and they're totally perfect, and I put you in a loop situation and you get a very different response because everybody is an individual. Your hearing aids are not set the same as your husband's or your wife's or your child's or your neighbor's. You're going to get a very different response. So there's no one size fits all, and it's very important to work closely with your dispenser or your audiologist. If you're not getting an excellent signal when everybody else is, that's a good sign something wrong, but you're never going to get the same signal. Your brain, as we were talking yesterday about cognition, is the center of all of this. Some people can take a pretty crummy signal and do very well with it. Other people can't. So no such thing as one size fits all, and everybody isn't an individual. Men are not good at this, but patience is a virtue. If there's a problem with the hearing aid, when you go to the T-coil or the loop setting, they can be separate, you need to work that out one-on-one with the individual programming your device. I can only speak about Au.D devices, but I spoke to some of my colleagues just to confirm virtually all the top end from any of the major manufacturers have programmable telecoils. And this is so important because if you're not getting the results you would like, it's really incumbent on you to work with the person programming your hearing aid to make sure it's maximized. When the automatic program is put into the hearing aid in our devices, I'll let my colleagues speak to theirs, it's built off program 1. So what that means, whatever the mic program was that you liked the best or that they set up for you, the telecoil is built off of that automatically, let's say. So you're getting an analog, well, I shouldn't use the, you're getting a representation of program 1 in your telecoil program unless it's been specifically programmed for you. And this is very important because they can be changed. If it's not working well, and there's a difference between an observation and a complaint. You will notice in most telecoil settings that the sound quality is very different. Of course it is. It's a very different program. But it should be acceptable. And if it isn't acceptable, it's incumbent on you to work with the individual audiologist or dispenser because, as I said before, no two patients have the same perception. The spectral response of the telecoil goes from about 400, 500, 600 hertz at the low frequency end. And you know, I hear a lot of people talk about spectral response, frequency, and pitch. It's all the same thing. I know that when my mom and dad go to conferences and they hear these terms, it means little to them. And I hope most of you understood that. But when you're hearing these terms, the low end, the lowest frequency or pitch that the telecoil passes is generally around 400 or 500 hertz, and the highest is about 3,000. There are reasons for that are historic. That they don't make a lot of sense anymore today because we actually have in standard hearing aids bandwidths that go out to 8 and 10 and 12,000 hertz, and we do that because it matters a great deal. But we are still limited in telecoils and loop systems, and that'll probably change. One of the things that I've enjoyed is to realize that the standard on a loop goes out to 5,000 hertz, but very few hearing aid telephone T-coils installed in hearing aids can actually capture that entire bandwidth that's delivered through the loop, so that's a problem. I won't beat that one to death anymore. I told you this in passing. The P1 program, your first program, is what feeds the automatic telephone coil programming. So compression, attack release times, all of those parameters within your microphone program are maintained. So that's important. Now, in ours, we have two. The default is built off program 1, but it can receive the full bandwidth of the loop, and it is not gain boosted. You see, the telephone circuit in ours is gain boosted because it has those roll-offs that we were saying. It's a limited spectral or frequency response, so it sounds quieter, so we boost it for you automatically. And let's see, I have about 30 seconds. If program 1 is the mic program on ours, then we have a default program, not just the telephone coil program, and that can be programmed out to the 5,000 hertz bandwidth. But again, it won't happen unless you speak to your dispenser or your audiologist to make sure they understand you need more information in your T-coil program or your default T-coil program. I know it's a little bit confusing. I'd be happy to take your emails and respond to you, and I'll send you a copy of my presentation if that's of interest. But in the interest of time, I have to end it. Thanks for being here today.
Good morning. My name is Jasongulster, and I run a research group, a clinical research group with Starkey Laboratories, and we're focused on looking specifically at how patients respond to modern hearing aid technology. Now, a few years ago, we reevaluated the importance of telecoils in modern hearing aids. And we saw that the industry in many ways was moving away from telecoils because hearing aids were getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and hearing aids and telecoils were less common in hearing aids at that time. And we knew that there's a global need for telecoils in hearing aids. And at that point, we set a product or a hearing aid requirement in all Starkey products that they need to have a telecoil. So today, in all behind-the-ear products, and the vast majority of in-the-ear products, with the exception of the most tiny ones, you'll find a telecoil in every available style. And we know that telecoils that do exist in hearing aids are getting progressively smaller to accommodate the needs of cool-looking hearing aids. But we know that there's a need for more robust, stronger telecoils. And we've heard a number of times that orientation of these telecoils affects their performance. And for many of us, we've grown used to positioning that phone near the telecoil in a position that's slightly unnatural for the new hearing aid wearer. That's a behavior that we have to adapt to. So if we think about the majority of hearing aid users, it's not natural for them to position that phone near the hearing aid or to tilt it accordingly. So we need to take these things into consideration when we're designing hearing aids. Now, it's unlikely that we're going to find a solution for putting large, powerful telecoils in small hearing aids. So we need to move the telecoil. And what's exciting is that we're seeing the opportunity to take that telecoil from the hearing aid and put it in an external device where we can find a larger, more powerful telecoil, and we can use wireless streaming to send audio to the hearing aids. This is a step forward in the quality of telecoil performance. So we may see things like this worn around the neck that allow us better access to hearing loop streaming audio and telephone streaming audio. But as we also heard, what's equally important in terms of design and in terms of telecoil orientation, whether it's in the hearing aid or outside of the hearing aid, is the programming of that hearing aid so that it's set not only from a microphone perspective, but a telecoil perspective to meet your individual needs. And what you will find, and I'm showing you some of the same information that we've all talked about earlier in a different way, what you will find is that in this green line, you see a hearing aid response. And if you see how it peaks in the middle and looks like a mountain, that's because this is optimized for the telephone. It has a narrow range of sound because that's the narrow range of sound that a telephone has. And this is generally what your hearing care professional will automatically have access to when they program your hearing aids. Now, it is possible to have a slightly broader amount of frequency, as Doug mentioned, in a loop. It's not much broader, but it's slightly less narrow. And so there is a possible advantage to having a telephone coil memory and a loop memory in your hearing aid, where you can optimize those settings for your specific environment. Loop quality is going to vary greatly, just as we've already seen today in the last few minutes. So we need parameters set in our hearing aids that meet your needs in your environment. So if your place of worship is somewhere where you end up every week, it's reasonable to optimize one program for listening there, and then have another one that you use at home with your telephone. So the point being in all of this information, that it's important that you work with your hearing care professional, that their office isn't the world that you live in. And there are situations where you may need to grab them by their ear and take them into your environment to optimize your listening. Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Dan Tibbs. I am the education coordinator with Widex USA. I run our university program. I work out of our research facility in the Chicago area. So I'm going to spend a couple of minutes just speaking about what Widex does in terms of how we integrate telecoils into our products and how some of the frequency response components, similar to my colleagues earlier. So what you're seeing is actually a screenshot of one of our newer products. It's called the Fusion. We actually put in a new optimized telecoil into this very small receiver in the canal device. This particular device can go from a mild to a severe / profound hearing loss, depending on what size receiver you put on it. But what you can see below the dark solid line is actually the frequency response for our telecoil for this particular product. You'll notice that the input is about 10 milliamps. I'm sure you've had a lot of discussion this weekend so far on the inputs of different loop systems. Typically, a lot of them are around 100 milliamps is what most systems will do. And what will happen is if you put 100 milliamp input into this telecoil, it's going to be about 20 decibels louder than what you see on this screen right now. So the frequency response is not affected by the input of the loop system that you're utilizing, so you'll still get this nice broad frequency response with this particular model. All of our telecoils are what we call pre-amplifier, meaning it comes into the hearing aid before the hearing aid begins to process it. So what the loop will emit its signal, the telecoil will pick it up. You're going to be limited by whatever receiver you are by the hearing aid, but as it comes into the hearing aid, you'll have this particular frequency response. And then what the clinician has available to them is they can adjust the overall gain for our particular hearing aid, so they can make the overall output of the hearing aid louder or softer if you need it to be louder. The other adjustment that they have available to them is the telecoil sensitivity, so they can make the telecoil more sensitive or less sensitive depending on if there's any interference issues in that particular environment. And there's quite a considerable range of adjustment that the clinician has available to them. You're seeing the number 0 on there, which is our default. It can go up +6, -12, etc. So there's a lot of flexibility with that. The other thing that I really wanted to also point out, and I know Jason had just alluded to their particular system, Widex also utilizes a wireless streamer type system. I have one of these myself as well, and during some of the earlier talks today, I was experimenting in the back with the loop system, as the Fusion device that I showed you a minute ago is something I also wear. I was using the telecoil that was actually on the Fusion, as well as switching to the telecoil that's built into our streamer called the MDEX that you're seeing up there right now. And I was actually getting very similar response between the two. One wasn't louder or softer versus the other. But what's nice about utilizing a device like this is that you do have the ability to increase and decrease the volume while I'm utilizing it. So if I'm sitting in the back and it wasn't quite loud enough, I could physically turn up the volume of the sound coming into my hearing device. If, for example, there were people speaking behind me during the presentation and it was getting distracting, you have the ability to push another button and turn the actual microphones on the hearing aid off and only pick up the looped system signal. So there was a lot of flexibility built into that. In addition to the fact that this device can be utilized as a remote control, you can pair it by Bluetooth to your cell phone and stream that through it as well. So there's just a lot of versatility, and then you'll see a lot of the manufacturers having some sort of device like this. And then last but not least, with this particular device, if you're utilizing a hearing aid that does not have a telecoil built into it on board, let's say like a really small receiver in the canal, or perhaps even with our device with a CIC hearing aid that does not have a telecoil, if you utilize a streamer like this, you can still pick up that induction system wherever you are and have it wirelessly transmitted to your hearing devices. So a lot of flexibility amongst the manufacturers as we go forward in terms of bandwidth of the telecoils and what kind of ways you can utilize interfacing with those loop systems that are out there. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up so we have enough time for everyone else, but if you have any questions in the Q&A, we'll be happy to address that.
Can you read me? I hope you all can hear me. My name is Connie Anderson. I'm the chairman of the IEC loop standard, IEC 61184. It's very interesting to hear all the other speakers talking about the datal thing. It's very important to understand it's a system. We just said the receiver is a T-coil and the hearing instrument. Some of these things will be really repeatable, and I try to just glance through it, the most obvious one, really. You have a transmitter and a receiver. We all know that. The good thing with this system is a worldwide standard. No radio frequency you need to change or anything like that. Just switch to T position and it will work. In Hong Kong, in Norway, in US. The hearing instruments, I mean specifically, we would like now to find out the standard. So many other ideas or function we're talking about. You have the microphone, you have the telecoil, you have the empty switch. It could be software switch, it could be automatic, mechanical, all kinds of different possibilities. And you transmit, you process it firstly, of course, in the way that we described there earlier, and you get acoustic energy out into the air. Of course, not always acoustic energy, sometimes directly to the inner ear, cochlear implants, or to bone conductive system as well. But in this one, we just concentrated on acoustic output. So you have input and you have output. And the input, acoustic input, if we compare this very quickly, if you have a 70 dB signal input at 1 meter distance, and you have a 60 dB gain, 60 dB is at 1,000 times, quite a lot, you will have an output of 130 dB. This is a principal discussion. So if you look at the loop level, on the other hand, that goes into the telecoil, that's a fixed standard. The level is fixed for the peaks for 400 milliamps per meter. Doesn't matter if it's speech or music, but it's fixed actually. So the end result with the telecoil sensitivity, you have 130 dB as well. So that's a good thing. When you switch between microphone and T position, you should have the same level, approximately as a person talking at 1 meter distance to you. And all these numbers are relative numbers as well. We just heard about the 10 milliamps. It could be a little confusing, but it's actually more or less the same thing. Okay, I think I already stated that. I don't like to go into data because of the time of this, but it could be presented in a very different way. So hearing instruments has their own standard, but many parameters can't be standardized. I mean, the frequency response is difficult to be standardized because it's individual. But the hearing loops, all the parameters are, or most of the parameters anyway, almost all of them are standardized. Now that's a very good thing. It's fixed. We can measure, don't need to argue really, just measure, and that's the most important thing. Big difference actually. Now, ANSI, which is trying to harmonize with the international standard, they have the 3.22, they have many, many abbreviations. And when you use them, and when you listen to people who use this abbreviation, please try to focus on the details. I can hear many people are using them wrongly. There's so many different details one need to take care of. So use them with cautions, please. Good news, ANSI standard has just decided, and also with help of Juliëtte, as well. Hello, Juliëtte. I know. She was not listening. All right. But the good thing for the new ANSI standards coming, it takes a while, but it has now been put from the annex to the front for the Telecoil specification. So in the future, we will hope for a better standardized Telecoil sensitivity. Hopefully. That's very good thing happening here in the US. So the standard parameters, what are they? I mean, it's a level, and we already said that, 400 milliamps per meter, that's very important. And it should be for a whole space. So this is, I don't have a mouse here really, so I can't point it out, but this is an area, and you have different levels in that area. That's a typical area for a loop system. In this particular case, it's something like 3 dB difference only, but that's a vertical. Now, the standardized parameters, you have magnetic field strength from electrical appliance as well. Well, some of us call it hum. But it's the same as a loop system. Every electrical appliance transmits as a loop system by itself directly into the hearing instrument. So you could be hearing noise from the T-coil directly. And we just mentioned that before, so I won't go into more detail to that. But today, I would say it's less problematic because of new standard EMC rules. You decided it should not emit too much electrical noise. We all know that the electrical environment is getting better and better day by day. It's a good thing, very good thing. We just talked about frequency response. And this is, I would say, quite a typical frequency response for a hearing aid. You have the microphone frequency response, and you had a telecoil frequency response. And you can see there's a 25 dB difference there. And in Sweden, where I come from, and Scandinavia, we're quite strict about this. We would like it to be the same. Because today, the background noise is not that difficult. So we would like the frequency response of the hearing loop to be the same. That's a general approach, actually. So that's just a wish that we would like to put forward. And also, just like me to point out, the frequency response from the hearing instrument is huge. And it could be in the pendule setting. It could be because it's difficult to get a good frequency response from a tiny, tiny little speaker sitting in a quite large cavity. It's not large, really, but large compared to the small membrane that transmits acoustic energy. But the loop, it's fixed, should be flat within 100 to 5,000 hertz plus minus 3 dB. That's very important. It should be a transparent system. That's the basic idea. So because of the individual things, it's very important to understand you can't really judge a loop system with just one person coming in testing with the hearing instrument. You must measure. If you are very experienced, you can do that. Okay. Oh, now, the specification for loop system, it's vertical. We already said that. So look at this. This is a vertical position, and how much does it differ? Linda just said that would disappear. But if it differs like this, if you move your head 45 degrees in all directions like that, there is 3 dB drop. That's all. But if you pass that angle to a 90 degree, that would be totally silence. So therefore, it's important that the telecoil is also, for the hearing aid manufacturer, is positioned vertically. The magnetic sensitivity should be the highest on the vertical position. But you can transmit vertical and horizontally at the same time. That means that you can actually bend your head down and pray, make notes in school, and that could be for the loop system, but it's also possible to technically do it in a hearing instrument, not just adding 2 loops system. You have to do some electrical things as well. Otherwise, you get just one resulting director. But it's possible to do that. It's a huge improvement if we can do that. If you can have it in the standard, I will be very happy. We'll see. Okay. So I have some conclusions and wish, if I may say so. And that's one of the things is increased low frequency response. In places where it's not much hums really, and not much of the background noise as we decide, it's good to have even a stronger or higher output in the low frequency, because you don't have low frequency masking. Now, hum harmonics remover. Because hum, background noise, they are specific frequencies. The harmonics are specific. We know them. And if we can measure them by FFT in the hearing instrument, we should be able to have the filter and cut it off on all the frequency, not just a low frequency where we try to do by lowering the sensitivity. Terrible. So that is within reach for the Telecoil. So we can actually electronically remove the background noise even for frequency in the voice bandwidth. So that's another wish. And the default sensitivity, that's another wish. I really would like to appreciate if all the hearing aid manufacturers can have a default setting for the 400 milliamps per meter. Instead, sometimes, very often, for the 100 milliamps per meter, trying to compensate for the low-level loop systems. I would like to have several channels. I would like to have a coded Telecoil system. That's what I would like to have. It's very possible to do that. So if you can have a coded system, let's say with 3 channels, you will be away for the background noise hum as well. If you can have a coded system, like an FM system, or any coded system, really. And you can still have a general channel for the now standardized loop system that you can go in all public places. But for school systems or room close to each other where you do need this, you can, or in this room, if we have someone translating to German or whatever, you can just switch your setting to your channel. It's a wish, but we should have wishes all our life. Thank you.
While I was listening to the presentations, I have 2 comments to make for those of you who are consumers. I think that if your hearing aid is programmed for telephone reception, in some hearing aids, you may not get the full bandwidth. So it may be loud, but it may not be distinct. So that's one take-home message, perhaps for you and your audiologist to figure out. And perhaps you can have 2 settings, one for Telecoil on the telephone and one setting for in a loop. The other comment I have to make is that if you are not getting good Telecoil reception, or you find that there is a lot of variation when you are just bending down to write and you have to kind of do this to hear, it may be that in your particular hearing aid, the angle of the T-coil is past that 45 degree, so that when you bend your head, suddenly you will go to almost a null point in a loop system. I'm also aware that there are some make hearing aids where the T-coil is actually in an horizontal position, and I've heard of people having to prop up their hearing aid when they're in a loop. I mean, that's kind of a last resort, but it can be done. So for that particular situation, if you prop up your hearing aid and you hear better, then you may have a T-coil that's not oriented properly. I'm wondering if we have a little bit of time to answer a few questions before we go for lunch. And I don't know if I'll be the correct person to answer, but there is a portable microphone on the table.
What's streaming? Could somebody define streaming?
What's streaming? Streaming really means sending information from a television or a cell phone or your iPod to your hearing aids. But most hearing aids cannot receive that streamed signal. It needs to go through what is called a gateway device. And that's what Dan was showing you. That little remote control can pick up the signal from the iPod or the iPhone and then it streams, it sends the signal to the hearing aid. That type of system is good for one-on-one, your TV to you, your cell phone to you. But in a large auditorium, it cannot stream audio to 100 people with hearing aids and cochlear implants. So the T-coil is the common denominator. Is that a good word? That's what we find common in cochlear implants and hearing aids. But perhaps you want to talk to some of these people after the presentation. Thank you very much.